We're going to start today talking a lot about what's been one of the biggest stories in the prospect news. And it's not really a story yet because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And that's what's going on with Matvei Michkov, the Philadelphia Flyers, and SKA St. Petersburg, the team in the KHL that owns his rights. And to be completely frank, we don't know exactly what's going on, but there's obviously been a little bit more smoke. There was a report this weekend in Sport Express, which is one of the top news outlets in Russia for sporting news. And Arthur Karulin, who is one of the reporters out there that covers hockey most closely, reported essentially that there is talk of Matvei Michkov's contract with SKA St. Petersburg, which lasts until 2025-26 presently, could be terminated. And in that result, in the end, would allow Michkov to get out of the contract before it's over, and then would be able to join the Flyers essentially as a free agent because he would not have any contractual obligations. Well, let's talk about a lot of the different things that we know so far. And so we at least have that one report. What we know is that Michkov currently is under contract with SKA St. Petersburg until 2025-26. That's still two more seasons after the one that we're just about to complete here. That's a long time to wait for a top prospect. It was a risk that the Flyers were willing to take as a rebuilding team, knowing that he was such an integral piece of the team. The other thing we know about Matvei Michkov is that for the last two seasons, he's actually been loaned out by SKA to Sochi. And why did they do that? Well, because they couldn't get him the ice time with St. Petersburg. So they sent him to Sochi. He has one of the best seasons ever by a player under 20 in the KHL. Only Kirill Kaprizov had more points than Michkov did this past season. And as a U20, I should say. And that is really intriguing. Obviously, he's ready for more. But the question is will St. Petersburg give him the opportunity to play more? And if they aren't, where does that leave Michkov? And where does that leave SKA St. Petersburg? They're only going to be potentially able to get two seasons out of what has largely been considered the best Russian prospect since Alex Ovechkin. So it's a very complicated situation. Here's the other thing that is in play that we should talk about and discuss. There is no transfer agreement between the NHL and the KHL. That's why if there is going to be some movement between the two sides, there has to be no valid contract on one of the sides. So you may recall a few years ago, Ivan Fedotov was signed to a contract by the Philadelphia Flyers. He was not under contract at that point by CSKA Moscow. And that basically allowed, he figured he was going to go to North America. Well, you probably also know that he was detained by Russian authorities, told that he was skipping out on his military obligations, was sent to military service for a year, then went back, signed a new contract with CSKA Moscow, and then he ends up playing a season. The IIHF steps in. They say, hey, wait a second. He has a valid NHL contract that was signed. And they're basically saying, no, it isn't. The Russian team was saying, no, it's not. But it was. And even though the IIHF has expelled Russia from international competition, they're still the international governing body of the sport. They control things like transfers and things like that. Well, they've issued a 3-year transfer ban for CSKA Moscow for violating that. They've also told Ivan Fedotov he is not able to play in any international competitions, which includes the Olympics. And as of right now, Russia is not involved in IIHF events, but we don't know whether or not Russia will be included under that, Russian Olympic athletes banner at the Winter Olympics in a couple of years when NHL players are going to be allowed to play. And if they are, that obviously opens the door for a player like Fedotov. Well, not if he's banned. And so that is apparently still happening. So there's that contentiousness that exists in the current status that we have right now between the NHL and the KHL. It's very complicated. But basically, until Michkov's contract is officially terminated, and really not terminated, but bought out, and the details of how that happens in Russia, of how a player is able to buy out his own contract, is very murky. It's a very expensive proposition. There are rules as to who can pay the buyout. I believe it has to come from the player. Like the Flyers can't pay the buyout for him. So that's another situation that complicates and why this is not going to be a quick process. What I will say, though, is that there is enough smoke here to say that it is at least possible that Michkov's contract situation will be resolved. He will maybe have it terminated, or if it's not resolved this offseason, maybe the following season, so he doesn't have to wait that extra year. The question that I think a lot of people have is, why would SKA St. Petersburg let go of this tremendous prospect, especially one that just had a tremendous season? And that's really where things are unclear. You kind of have to read through the lines, and there's not really any official statements. You're kind of reading it through the media, and you're reading it through Russian media, so you're reading it through translators, and there's all sorts of complicating factors. But what ultimately could happen is, if that contract goes away, Matvei Michkov signs with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's able to play for them as soon as next season. That really enhances the timeline of a team's rebuild. He should be relatively ready to get into the NHL at his age. Maybe he'll need some time in the AHL, but that's pretty doubtful. And he probably wouldn't be coming over here if he thought that he was going to have to spend some time in the AHL, even though I think that is a very valuable step for a lot of players, especially players coming over from overseas. And I think more Russian players should take teams up on that opportunity to use that stepping stone for a smoother transition to the NHL. But either way, a prospect of Michkov's caliber is typically going to get the opportunity to make the team. And I think that if he's going to sign with the Flyers, the expectation is he'll be on the NHL roster next year. How quick would he be able to make an impact? That really remains to be seen. Obviously, he's still very young, but he's also has this tremendous success. He's, unprecedented almost in terms of, the players that he's comparable to in his age bracket in the KHL. A really remarkable opportunity for him to come over to the NHL and maybe make an immediate impact. And this would obviously impact the Flyers' plans. I think you want to have this resolved before the draft. You want to have this resolved before free agency. The Flyers have a lot of flexibility. They can do a lot of different things. And if they have Matvei Michkov in the mix, that really changes the whole dynamic. But the reason that you can't count your chickens before they hatch is because with this Russian situation, with the geopolitical climate being what it is, with the fact that you're talking about a very high-profile Russian player, a player that has some cachet in that country, a player that is valued in that country, and a player that, you look at these teams, they don't want to lose their stars too soon. And we saw Danila Yurov, who had a tremendous season in the KHL, re-sign a one-year deal to stay in the KHL for an extra season. We're hoping that he'll come over to North America to play for the Minnesota Wild in a couple of years to get a look at that player. But Michkov, there's all sorts of different pressures. There's political pressures. There's, contract pressures, and there's expectations and everything else.